Hello, everybody, and welcome to Some Patches Required. My name's Zach.
And my name yet remains Aaron.
And today we've got a special episode on games going from premium to free-to-play, with the specific focus, at least at the beginning, talking a little bit about the Overwatch 2 drama. But before we get into that, I just wanted to say thank you to all of the returning listeners, and thank you to all the new listeners. Please like, subscribe, comment, any way that you can engage with our content. We really appreciate it, especially sharing, because it's really the best way to help us grow. Before I continue on, though, I will ask Aaron, did I miss anything?
No, I just wanted to kind of glom onto the sharing aspect. It truly is our best way of growing, and anytime you can help us out with that by sharing our show with someone you think would enjoy it, or, like I said, at least at one point before, someone you think would definitely not enjoy it. Those downloads spend the same, baby. So share us around if you enjoy the show, and if you don't, sorry, let us know why. We're always open to feedback.
Yep, always open to feedback, and if there's any topics that anyone thinks would be particularly interesting to cover, also happy to take that feedback as well.
100%. We should set up an email for that. That we could give out for people to request topics. That would be interesting.
It's a good point. I don't know if we'd use our just like default one that we currently have, but this is behind the scenes talk that I guess doesn't need to happen.
Yeah, I was going to say if only making email addresses didn't cost so dang much.
Yeah, exactly.
Which actually is relevant to what we're talking about. So with that exceptionally elegant segue out of the way, if you'll pardon the use of way twice there, Zach, would you walk me through the Overwatch drama?
Yes, I can. And for those that do not know, Overwatch 2, the sequel, well, it's actually kind of complicated, but the air quotes sequel to the first Overwatch has released recently, and there's been a little bit of a hubbub around it, mostly because of the fact that it is a free-to-play game, and as a result, it has a few things that people aren't too keen on. From the monetization side of things, the unlock side, there's just a bunch of pretty big changes in the second game that people aren't too keen on. And specifically, the reason that we're talking about it today is because after I was looking at a lot of the news, the broadcasting, whatever you want to call it, right? The general discourse around the game, I found that it was kind of uncharitably negative to some of the changes. So today we're going to be talking about, some of the changes that they've made, expand that out to just generally why games would do that, and maybe go a little bit into what's more fair to criticize them on and what's less fair. So anyway, Aaron, you just watched some of the videos. Would you agree with my statement on the charitability? There's been a lot of negativity, like this Kotaku article. What are your thoughts?
So I think, I would say there. It's really hard in the age of internet discourse to actually have a conversation about something, because I think ultimately all of the changes that have come to Overwatch 2, as opposed to the first one, are, there are some positives to them, there are some negatives to them, but when there is enough negative attention placed on something, everyone just tends to kind of glom onto it, and then that becomes the entire narrative, right? So I don't think Overwatch 2 is like a full disaster in any serious way other than the PR. Honestly, I think there has been a lot of very justified criticism over some of the changes, some of the gating that has been put in place, and the fact that they're basically selling a $40 game for nothing and pretending like we wouldn't notice. There's a lot of justified criticisms there, but there are a couple of things that I think are kind of positive in terms of the move to free-to-play. that get completely glossed over as a result of us just all kind of wanting to. This is the new controversy. This is the thing we can really get angry about. I was tired of being angry about the last thing, so now I've got a new one. Let's just pile on. So yeah, no, I would say there's been, the community reaction has been pretty piss poor, and I don't think there's a lot of wiggle room for interpretation on that one. But whether or not that's because the players are just pissed off at Activision Blizzard in general, which again is justified, pissed off at the changes, which again is justified, or just don't like to see certain types of change that benefit players who aren't them, and it's up in the air in terms of where that lands with hardcore fans. And I should say, as a disclaimer, I have never played one match of Overwatch. I find it very confusing. Truthfully, I find it very confusing. I'm sure I would be able to get into it if I ever put the time in. Which, is actually one of the appealing things about the move to free to play, is that I can kind of dabble in what Overwatch could feel like for me without needing to drop money up front. So at least that's pretty good.
Yeah.
But yeah, just wanted to add that caveat there. So anything I say that is completely wrong about competitive shooters or Overwatch specifically, please be kind. Don't bully me.
just kick him while he's on the ground. Just spit on him.
I don't know many things. I'm a plebe in that sense. I am well known for being mostly a single player game sort of person. So don't hold too much of it against me.
Yeah, I think you bring up a few interesting things. So first of all, I have not touched Overwatch 2. I have played the first one, but it's really not kind of a game that interests me all that much. I really prefer other things, like honestly Valorant I prefer over Overwatch. But I think the interesting thing is there are certainly components of this whole situation that you can criticize Overwatch for. For example, the length of time that it takes to unlock a character in the game is, I think it's, I can't remember exactly, so I'm not going to detail on it, but I think it's more than a month to get one of the characters on a battle pass.
Yeah, depending on the character and depending on how fast you progress and depending on whether or not you have the battle pass, it can take a long fucking time to unlock characters, and it takes even longer to unlock all of the skins for those specific characters. So we're looking at something like I think one of them was years without the battle pass.
Yeah, that's for
to unlock all the skins.
Yeah. And I mean, I think that's pretty typical for skins, and I don't think that caused as much of a hoopla, but definitely the character unlocks, and the characters being specifically Kiriko, that's the new character, being behind a battle pass. She is on the free tier, so you can get her for free. But if you don't want to just buy the battle pass and unlock her immediately, there is some grinding involved. And that was one of the big points of contention. So I guess where I'm going with that is that really I don't think it's necessarily right to hate the mechanics behind how Blizzard decided to monetize the game. I think a lot of that's necessary when you're moving from a premium model to a free-to-play model. But I do think it is okay to be critical of their implementation of those mechanics and say things like, well, I don't think it should take, I'm just throwing out a number, like a month and a half to unlock a character playing this battle pass or whatever it is, right? So that's kind of where I think I come from in a lot of this debate, is critical of the implementation of a lot of their strategies, but I don't think that there's anything that they've put in that is egregious. It's not like characters are behind a loot box or anything particularly problematic in that way.
Yeah, that'd be a whole other can of worms. I think so what we're talking about is kind of a segue. We're not going to get right to it, but we're going to get a lot more into why certain mechanics tend to appear in free-to-play games, and it comes down to the fact that the game was made to make money. It was made by Activision Blizzard. They don't like anything more than money. But that's not an Activision Blizzard specific trait in any industry. But the consensus seems to be that the formula has kind of changed. And one of the things that struck me pretty hard when I was doing some research into this, which I had to do, again, because I'm a neophyte, was that a lot of the way that they've implemented things like daily challenges inside of the battle pass and things like that mean that you end up playing solo to achieve your own goals, to progress faster through a game that even when you have the battle pass wants to kind of gate characters and gate skins, and even gate modes to I've forgotten where I'm going with this sentence, if I'm being completely honest. The implementation of those sorts of things seem to have fundamentally changed the direction of cooperative play. Whereas before, I think it was from one of your Bellular videos that I watched in research, and then another one that was quoting a PC Gamer review of the game after a press, or maybe not a full review, but after a press event where they got to play it. It was talking about the fact that, that element of cooperative play has actually been kind of cut in half because each individual player has all of these daily challenges or, weekly challenges or whatever that they need to really, really invest their time in, log in every single day, play, and try to get the bonus XP for completing those challenges in ways that only benefit the single player. Whereas as a team-based shooter, Overwatch in its prime was supposed to be about finding creative ways to work with all of these interesting different characters. So that's kind of a fascinating, weird little flip that changes the game's purpose, really, without changing the game's purpose. And I can see there being a divide there, a pretty big schism between what you expect from a cooperative team-based shooter as opposed to something like Call of Duty Warzone, which I guess can be team-based as well, but may not have as much emphasis on using unique abilities to support other players. So one of the examples that they came up with was like leaving your shield up for too long, because there's a daily challenge about leaving your shield up or catching so many hits with your shield or something like that, which can, for super high level players, completely change the way that you play the game. And again, I'm speaking as someone who hasn't done it, but I've watched a lot of like clips and everything, and people seem to have a really solid grasp on how to best use any of the pretty diverse cast of characters to best benefit the team. And when the focus is on your own performance outside of the team, that can really, really change anyone's mindset on a team. I'm not even sure, is it 5v5 now or something?
Yeah, it's 5v5 now. And elaborate on your point. It's also just you're not gonna play how you want to play. I mean, that's really
Exactly.
the key thing that they hit on a lot is Halo Infinite. So Halo Infinite, another live service game, multiplayer went from a premium to a free to play model. But the thing that they hit a lot, at least Bellular and so Michael and Matt, they hit on a lot is like Halo Infinite had massive issues on the achievability and the fun that there was to like complete the challenges. The challenges just were not fun. They were not the way that a lot of people wanted to engage in the game. And that's kind of the problem with challenges in general, is not that like challenges are inherently problematic. They're a method for keeping players in your game, coming back to consistently, potentially try new things. But yeah, the implementation of that system is incredibly important.
Well, yeah, no, and I would say, like, as kind of a corroborating point, I've recently been playing through the Assassin's Creed Ezio collection on the Nintendo Switch because I don't like to leave my bed. And one of the things that I remember really disliking about Brotherhood was the full synchronization mechanic, where you had to accomplish very specific things within a mission in order to achieve full synchronization. So, there's this one assassination, you can't swim at any point, but the target is on a boat. There's do not be detected and whatever. And all of these mechanics are tied into unlocking kind of bonus memories for Ezio that kind of flesh out his story and characterize him a little bit more as other than just a playboy. Mm-hmm. And I remember absolutely hating that, because every time I would go into one of the lairs of Romulus, which are these like little challenge puzzle sort of things, there's some sort of mechanic that's like, if you can beat this in 8 minutes or less, you get full synchronization. And I'm like, but I don't feel like being pressured into doing that. So the benefit is it is a single player game that is not gating my actual progression through the game by not getting enough XP by completing these challenges, and I'm not hamstringing a team to complete those challenges. It's just me, myself, and I playing this game. So if I decide to say, screw it, I don't have to do that. Overwatch 2 is a very different sort of game than that. So the implementation of a mechanic like that can be, pretty troublesome.
Well, it's like I said, I think it's the not even just necessarily the mechanic, but it's there's a few things we're talking about with Overwatch and similar games. Is like if you've got the battle pass, you've only generally got a limited amount of time to complete it. And all of your progression through the battle pass, unless you purchase tiers, is all dictated by XP that you get, which you get from challenges. So the challenges are really your like key pivotal way of progressing through this thing that you've either, purchased or you haven't purchased, but you want to unlock, in this case, Kiriko for Overwatch. So that's kind of the added layer there, is if the mechanisms with which you get, or through which you get the XP, are just not engaging, they're not fun, and you're only doing it to unlock a character, it's really kind of a draining and an awful experience. Because I think you're not playing to have fun. You're playing to get the reward. And actually, Matt hits on this. I think it's an interesting point. And this has nothing to do necessarily with being free to play. Like challenges are typically in free to play games, but I don't think you necessarily inherently need them in a free-to-play game.
In this case, you do.
In this case, well, in Overwatch, they've implemented them, but I guess what I'm saying is, like, there's nothing intrinsic about, like, in order for a game to be a free-to-play game, it has to have challenges. Like,
no.
It's not... Most games do, but, like, you don't necessarily need it. But, like, I digress, because the thing that I thought that was interesting that Matt talked about in relation to challenges is that you actually stop enjoying the game. You actually get so fixated on the reward component that you don't enjoy the game. You're not playing the game for enjoyment. You're playing the game to check off these rewards. And I think at that point, it's just really interesting, because it's like, well, why are you playing the game? Like, I don't play a game to complete a battle pass. I never think about games in that way. But that's kind of just the psychological thing that happens.
No, completely true. There's one game that I've been in heavy bolded air quotes, increase the font size on those bad boys, playing is this like idle clicker game that I actually haven't fully engaged with in over a year, but I still log in every day to get my reward. And part of the reason that I stopped playing because the game fucking plays itself, but B, I was just exhausted by like needing to log in every single day in order to continue progressing at a satisfactory rate. That just doesn't engender any sort of joy in me. It's just a thing that drains my battery while I'm not looking at my phone. It's not necessary. Again, like I said, I never think of playing a game as an excuse to complete challenges or get rewards. So why frame the entire thing about that, especially like I said in a team-based shooter where cooperation is the key to success? Why would you motivate individual players separately? Well, it's because it's randomized, and the more you can get players to keep coming back, because that idle clicker game has me coming back. That's one of the reasons you put challenges in, especially daily challenges, is you're trying to encourage people to engage with your game as much as humanly possible. And again, of course, that's absolutely not specific to FTP games alone. It's just kind of indicative of one of the ways that they like to try and make money.
Yeah. Well, it's like there's almost a one-to-one. So I'm going to actually use this because we're kind of hitting on Overwatch, I think, from the negative perspective quite a bit. With some of the stuff. And I haven't actually seen the challenges, so I don't know what the specific feedback on the challenges themselves have been. I know like Halo Infinite, as we mentioned, have been really bad. But monetization is incredibly important when you're in a free-to-play game. Like, I think the conversion rate for time spent in-game to how many dollars you spend is almost 1-to-1. Like, it is crazy how much money people will spend in a game if they're playing it consistently. So on that note, to what you just said, when you've got challenges, you've got daily login rewards, those are very solid ways of kind of like orienting a person's psyche, candidly, to like spend money. And there is kind of a gross sort of like, I feel like almost manipulation side to that. I want to clarify when I say that, I am not just talking about Activision. Like, this is any game that does it, right? Like, just so many games have psychological buttons that they're pushing on. Like, this is not an Activision Blizzard exclusive thing. But I do think it'd be ridiculous to say, like, I'm so pissed off at Overwatch because they have to monetize their game. Like, it is a massive investment by a company in a game. You know, these aren't free. People got to get paid. Developers got to get paid. So, like, you can't be mad that some of these mechanisms are in there in a free-to-play game. You know, to just hit the nail on the head, right? Like the battle pass. The battle pass has to be in there because it's the only way that they're going to fund the game. And like, I prefer that to loot boxes. Loot boxes are in Overwatch 1. They're generally, by some people, blamed for being the reason that loot boxes got so popularized. And I just would rather there be battle passes. And if they feel that they need to put a character behind a battle pass in order to make revenue, I mean, they've got that information. I think it doesn't feel good when the first game was a premium experience, but like, I understand why they made that move.
Yeah. I think again, we're kind of dipping into main point number 2 to branch away from Overwatch specifically. But I completely agree. Like, again, this is what I was trying to say, and I think I kind of miscommunicated a little bit on this one. Conversation analysis, it has to kind of like take the entire thing in, and it's really easy to be mad about something you don't like, which is to say, you know, I personally don't like loot boxes. I don't like microtransactions. I'm not even like the hugest fan of battle passes or any sort of like subscription, you know, renewing purchase thing, but a game, because it has to make money. It, like you said, it's an enormous investment, so you have to kind of temper what you're looking at in terms of like changes made from a game you may have loved like Overwatch to a game that you may bristle at like Overwatch 2. Like, why would they have made that decision? And it's because on the business side, it's an extremely smart decision. Having a starting out free-to-play title that you can just download and have may bring in some new players, and Overwatch 2, to its credit, has put some stuff in to try and make the new player onboarding process. I think there's a term for that you've written down that I hadn't actually heard before.
First time user experience.
Yeah, they've done some stuff that I mean, it's not even necessarily that closely tied to it being free to play, but opening it up as free to play means that you have to account for a lot more users, because people like me who weren't willing to spend a full price on a game to buy Overwatch 1, because it's not a game I normally like to play in that style, I might download Overwatch 2 just to see, you know, what it's about. And so it's almost a recontextualized demo in that sense. So like, on a business level, it makes a lot of sense. The problem is just the implementation. Again, having not played it, I can't speak to it personally, but if we're going to weigh both sides of this argument, you know, equally, then we do need to acknowledge that we've been very, 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 very vocal for the last 48 episodes, and now color at 49, the fact that employees should be paid. They have to be paid. They're doing a job. They're doing a lot of work. They're putting in a lot of hours. Mm-hmm. And as much as I may not enjoy watching, you know, hundreds of millions of dollars up to billions of dollars go to people who may or may not be morally reprehensible in terms of how they run a business, they also need to turn a profit. The company can't just give you the game for free, otherwise everything would be for free. So if this is a better money-making strategy for them, then I get the pivot, but the experience itself has to be satisfying.
Yeah, I think I was trying to kind of keep, you know, the framing is one of the things we were going to talk about later, but I think there's really no way to easily not talk about it as we're kind of going through each of these points. And I think what you hit on with the first-time user experience is a massive framing kind of failure on Blizzard's part, but and this hits in like people just being like overly negative. So you mentioned first-time user experience. So one of the things that they did to improve the first-time user experience is limit the characters that people have access to originally or at the start of the game. And then you unlock more characters the more you play the game, right? But when you have the premium game and you just have everybody unlocked from the get-go, and then you go to a game where it's free to play and maybe your favorite character is behind you playing like 20 or 30 games, of course that's going to feel bad. But like the reason they did that is so that new players don't feel overwhelmed with the larger character selection. Is that the best implementation of preventing people from being overwhelmed? I don't know. There's other systems, like you could maybe just have the easy characters unlocked at the beginning, and then when you do X amount of games, you choose who you want to unlock. So there's more, opportunity to pick who you want to unlock instead of the game choosing for you. But like, I understand, at least at some level, why you'd want to simplify stuff for, like, I'm talking like brand new players.
Me. You're talking about me.
Yeah. Exactly.
I'm saying that this entire system was designed to make me want to play Overwatch 2. Because I never played a single match of Overwatch 1. And one of the reasons I never got into competitive multiplayer shooters is because, even if I wasn't playing in something ranked, I would just get murked mercilessly, either because I'm shitty at games or because I just didn't have a full grasp of the mechanics yet.
Mm-hmm.
So, again, we have another recontextualization, which in this case, we're recontextualizing a tutorial. We're letting the game be its own tutorial in this sense, and I don't think that's inherently negative. I think the implementation, again, and the framing, it's one of the reasons that Blizzard just really dropped the ball, is that, like, the concept behind it, in my opinion, for a player like me, how many more caveats can I add? For me, a player like me, that might actually work. But there are a lot of extremely hardcore Overwatch players who are looking at this going, why are you selling a $40 game for free? And why are you hamstringing me in this situation? Like, unless you can just skip the progression, which I think you can if you've purchased the battle pass. There's like tools for skipping that sort of thing, and you can unlock all the characters by paying for them. But again, it feels like a recontextualized demo.
I don't think you can buy the old characters. You can buy the new ones. The old characters, I think, are still progress baited. Or gated. I said baited. But yeah, it's not. I don't think that their monetization, especially compared to like, going back to the monetization side of it with the characters and the battle pass. There's plenty of games that do that. Apex Legends, if I'm not mistaken, you have to buy the characters. League of Legends, you have to buy the characters. Valorant, you have to buy the character. Like, there are plenty of games that do this. And also, like, I don't think you've played League, Aaron, but League of Legends. No. It is not particularly easy to get a new character. Like, they have very much incentivized that game to make you want to buy characters. There's a free rotation every week, so you get to choose, like, play with new people. But it all goes back to the framing thing. Like, in League of Legends, that's just been normalized. That framing has been successfully done by Riot Games. Going from a premium experience like Overwatch to a free-to-play experience like Overwatch 2, they just failed to frame everything properly. I don't really know that they could have done it well, because I think they were always going to run into people that were kind of, for lack of a better way of putting it, like in the old guard, who were going to be mad when they had to pay to unlock a character. But like, this is just to point out plenty of games that do exactly what Overwatch is doing. And I would argue in some ways they do it in a worse way in terms of how quickly or how easily can you get a character. So it's weird.
Yeah. Would you give me an example of one of those if you have one on the top of your head?
I mean, it's just like League of Legends is the big, like, you get barely any essence. It's blue essence is what you use for characters. And there's like some other really convoluted systems on how you can get a character like more cheaply. But like, you're not talking about unlocking somebody in a day without using a credit card, or even a week, or like 2. Like, you'd really have to play a lot of the game.
Yeah. Which, again, I don't even necessarily think that's a terrible idea. Like, keeping you out of ranked until you've completed a certain number of matches. I think it can feel very restrictive, but ultimately, for someone like me, not playing against an absolute crazy master of the game on my first try may have kept me with a couple more multiplayer shooters that I abandoned after like 2 matches, because I was like, I can't compete with these people. Yeah. I'm not good enough, and I'm not, experienced enough in these mechanics. But I think in terms of like the move from free to play or the move from premium to free to play for Overwatch specifically, I think actually might have been softened. And I'm not sure how the marketing team would have gone about it in a different way if you wanted to introduce this sort of thing for it. That can be mitigated by not calling it Overwatch 2. That's a point I just wanted to hit on. We don't have to have a long, drawn-out conversation about it. But the fact that it's called Overwatch 2 means that it should be, in my brain, or at least in the brain of someone who hasn't played these games, calling it Overwatch 2 means it sounds like it's going to be like a full-on sequel. It is going to have updated mechanics, but similar mechanics, improved everything, and it will be a continuation of that world as it was to some extent. If they'd called it something different, like I think the backlash in terms of this stuff may actually have not even been as bad for like Diablo Immortal, which again is a false equivalency because we're not talking about like a full straight on sequel. We're talking about a mobile game. We're talking about a free-to-play mobile game, which we've talked about before. And it kind of softened the blow to the overall franchise. But when you're saying like the next mainline title in this series is Overwatch 2, and it's free-to-play. That's kind of an interesting shift that they might have been able to mitigate. But I think that's where a lot of people bristle, is that an Overwatch 2 should have looked, felt, and performed a little bit more like Overwatch 1.
Yeah.
Whereas, as we're going to talk about, there are a lot of necessary mechanical changes that go from that spawn immediately from the need to monetize a game that is free. It's kind of jarring, actually, because a lot of games, and we've talked about this before, you and I, Zach, the games that start out premium and then go free to play without changing titles or anything like that. And that seems to be a little bit more palatable to the people who really want to tweet angry things, as opposed to announcing a sequel that is a completely different format.
Yeah. I mean, going to the framing of it, because like I said, I think that just matters so much when you're talking about
it's extremely important.
You've got, you mentioned games that were premium that ended up free to play. Destiny 2, premium purchase initially, now a free to play game. Now Destiny 2 has a ton of different issues. I can't remember if you've played it when it's
I've actually, Destiny 2 is actually of the games we've talked about today, it's the one I've played the absolute most of. I put a fair number of hours into D2.
Yeah, and I mean, I would say that when it went free to play, some people were like, oh god, because I think there's a lot of like, oh, a game's dying or a game's in like dire straits when it goes free to play. I know that's like generally the consensus when like MMOs have gone free to play. We're talking like Terra Online, Star Wars: The Old Republic, the MMO. I mean, there's a long list. I'm not going to go through all of them. But my point being, like, there's definitely a negative framing that a lot of people put on that. But to your point, I think it's a lot easier to go from a game that's been out for a long time and then make that a free-to-play experience rather than the brand new toy. I almost feel like, to your point, Overwatch would have been better just labeling it like Overwatch. I don't know, some dumb like what did they call Destiny 2? It was like Beyond Light or something, I think was their name for it going free to play.
Yeah, that sounds about right. But I mean, yeah, like that's entirely about framing. Like if they'd called it Overwatch Unlimited, Overwatch Overdrive, I don't know, I don't care. They probably could have been able to spin and say like, this is the continuation of the Overwatch experience.
Yeah,
it is free to play. It is this. But calling it Overwatch 2 just makes it sound so much like a thing I could walk into GameStop and just buy.
Yeah. Well, the funny thing too is when your friends play Overwatch 2 on Battle.net, it doesn't say Overwatch 2. It says Overwatch. So it's not even Overwatch 2. Like, it's the weirdest branding thing. And
that's what that's why I bring that up. And again, I know I belabored the topic, but like it relates so much to that framing thing where like just in terms of calling it Overwatch 2 and marketing it almost as heavily as you did the first one, which was a premium experience, it's just confusing. The messages are so thoroughly mixed that I'm not sure whether I'm going forward or backward.
Yeah. No, they did not do themselves any favors there. And I think part of that's probably because it was meant to be like a standalone separate game at one point. And they were like, well, we don't want to label this something else because then people think we're going to we've killed the project. But yeah, there's not really, in my opinion, enough new content to justify an Overwatch 2 being the route that they like went with it. But like, you know, I get it.
I mean, hey,
to a degree.
What do I know? I'm just some schlub living in the Midwest.
So
but, yeah.
So the one thing I just want to, there's a few other topics related to the framing and the new mechanics, but the one thing I really wanted to hit on, because a lot of people, including Stephanie Sterling, have been really critical about some of what I would call like anti-cheat or like hacking prevention attempts that like Overwatch has designed. And I think it really gets into like the bad faith side of things. So I just wanted to bring some of those up because you mentioned, or you hinted to, the ranked progression being behind, playing, I think it's like 50 games. Like you have to play 50 games like before you can do ranked. Some of the other things is the characters locked behind game progression. And there's like, you have to connect your phone in order to log in. That one's a little bit annoying. I can understand why people are irritated by that. But my point with all this is like, when you become a free-to-play game, one of the big things you have to worry about is like Smurf accounts, if you know what that is, Aaron.
Yes, I actually do.
Okay,
and I will define it for similarly uneducated listeners like myself, because I actually looked up what smurfing was in order to record this episode. And it is basically when extremely highly ranked players or very skilled players make dummy accounts and then log back in to play matches against inexperienced players like myself, so that they can just blast you to crap, make your experience terrible, and gain a lot of XP doing so.
Yeah, it's basically just griefing people, like playing against people that are way worse than you just so you can do really well.
It is your 250th match, and you're playing against someone who it's their first.
It's like round 5. It's literally like the NBA basketball player just dunking on a little kid. Basically.
It's basically that. That's actually a very apt metaphor.
Yeah.
It'd be like me playing against LeBron.
Exactly. But also like, so then, there's people that obviously cheat and hack in the game. And so all of these different procedures are there to help make everyone's experience better by making it so it's difficult for you to get booted from the game or have your account banned and just make a new account. Like that is an issue that I think game studios have been trying to figure out for free-to-play games for a long period of time. And
that's why my lead-in was how easy and expensive it is to set up an email account.
Yep.
Huzzah! We've come full circle.
Yep.
Anyway, continue.
Oh no, I was just gonna say, like, I was just amazed by the amount of bad faith arguments towards Overwatch, or specifically Blizzard, when it came to this. Like the one that I thought was particularly egregious, just to give an example, and I still love the Jimquisition, still love Stephanie Sterling, think that their opinions are incredibly valid and solid most of the time. But like, they said something about like SMS Protect being a way of like gating Overwatch from poor people and basically making it a game that only people with money could play so they could get more money out of people. Like that was the framing that they gave for why Blizzard would do this. And I'm like, okay, that is so innately bad faith. It's ridiculous that anyone would even think of that. I think the more logical option is that everyone has a phone. So like, you know what I mean? Like, I just feel like there's so many bad takes.
Yeah. There are a lot of bad takes, but for the SMS protection, which again is meant to like lock a phone number to your account so that you have to use that in order to get in. So that way you can't, like, unless you're going to go buy a brand new phone and change your number, you won't be able to get a new account. I'm like, okay, that's kind of a clever way of getting around people smurfing accounts.
Yeah.
But there were a couple of things, and You know, I also very much enjoy the Jimquisition. I think Stephanie usually has some very, very good um, analysis of especially stuff relating to like economics and the society that forms around games. They have some very interesting takes, and I really enjoy their perspective a lot, and it's usually very well formulated. In this case, um, it just kind of ended up coming down to being capitalism bad, but one of the things that they did bring up that I thought was pretty good was there were a couple of restrictions, like well, and also in the Bellular video reflected this as well, is that certain phone carriers weren't supported. So like if you use Cricket Wireless, you can't use your phone number to log into Overwatch 2 at all. You can't use it. Not supported.
Yeah.
And then you said everyone has a phone. I would walk that back a little and say that most people have phones.
Well, yeah, no, I more, yeah.
Not every, yeah, and not everybody can afford a premium wireless service. So some people have to use prepaid phones.
Mm-hmm.
I remember I worked a job, and I can't remember where it was at, but there were a bunch of people who came in hoping to get like new stuff for their prepaid phones, like, hey, put this many hours on my phone. And I'm like, okay, this makes sense. If this is a person with limited means who needs to have a phone, because you basically need to have a phone in the modern world, then, you know, using a prepaid phone makes sense. But now that person is gated from playing Overwatch. Someone who uses Cricket Wireless because it's a budget option is now gated from playing Overwatch 2. And so my thought process on it, to counteract what Stephanie said, is just that must not have been intentional, but it was certainly tone deaf. I think there is criticism for that decision where, you know, it's not like they were particularly targeting people with, you know, moderate to low end income who may want to, you know, spend their hard-earned dollars playing a game they love on a system they could afford. And now, because they don't want to pay $1 billion to Verizon, they can't actually do it. And I get both sides of that argument as well, but I think there was some unintentional gating, because for as many terrible things as I've said about the leadership of Activision Blizzard, I don't think they would have thought we're going to gate poor people. I think that is a symptom, not an intention.
Yeah, no, that's exactly what I was attempting to say, is that there are, you know, it's another issue of like, is it the mechanism that's bad or the implementation? Like, is SMS Protect a bad idea inherently? No, it's not. The implementation is bad. Like, they had oversight. And I think that's what really rubs me wrong about some of these articles, is it just assumes that like Blizzard and the Blizzard team are purposely making these like candidly kind of weirdly evil decisions. And it's like, it's much more likely that they just didn't think about the fact that, to your point, prepaid phones are a thing. Like, I bet it was a bunch of like fairly well-to-do people, right, making this decision that do not know what it's like to have like a prepaid phone, or maybe not a phone at all, right? And I'm sure that's why this happened. And like, that's bad in its own way, but it's a lot less malicious than what I think some people are like trying to turn it into.
Yeah, it's inherent bias, not like focused, purposeful bias.
Yeah.
It's, you know, it's, again, like I said, it's a symptom, not an intention, which, you know, it sucks fully in either direction, but I don't think you can assign blame to Blizzard for not thinking that, considering how many people have phones and how much money mobile games make, and Blizzard knows that better than anyone. Thank you, Diablo Immortal.
Yeah, and there may have even been a point, like I think the absolute worst case is that there may have been a discussion and someone at the, you know, meeting brought up like, well, not everybody has phones. And, you know, I bet with the Cricket thing, that's just an accident. I bet they're going to try to patch that and fix that, if I'm being honest, if they can. But even for the people that were like, well, not everybody has a phone, so like, what are we going to do about that? I bet that they may have just taken like the cost benefit and been like, you know what, we really have to resolve this toxic player issue, And like that's so important to us that we're willing to gate some people off. I wouldn't be that surprised if that happened, if they view the benefit of doing SMS Protect as being big enough to cut some people out. But still, regardless, that sucks. And I think it is still a criticizable decision.
Yeah, for sure. It just depends on how you it depends on how you frame the criticism of the framing.
Yeah. Well, it's really, you can do pretty much anything, good or bad. I think I said this during our meeting prepping for this. You can really frame anything, whether it's a good, like an inherently well-meaning decision or a bad one, and get away with it depending on how you do it. Like, for example, Pokemon, which maybe we'll do an episode on how ridiculous it is at some point. But Pokemon, what is it, or like every 2 years, whatever it is, sells people the same game twice for full price. It's the same game functionally.
Yeah.
And it's just been framed and set up in a way that people think that's normal. And it's so weird when you actually look at it.
Yeah, it's bizarre. And it's also interesting, like, this actually brings to mind like a thing that was brought up in the Jimquisition video, which is that, you know, in terms of framing, the narrative is what controls perception, right? So Nintendo, for better or for worse, has been able to frame their entire thing around being able to do stuff like that. No one questions it when a Nintendo game that is 5 years old still costs $60, when Xbox and Sony are willing to drop their games down as demand decreases. You know, so why, you know, is Nintendo exempt from criticism for selling, well, not exempt, but mostly, like, there's not been a fervor about it recently, you know, selling you the exact same game in a bundle with the exact same game. It's a wild double standard, and it just kind of speaks to the fact that the narrative of this whole situation has completely reframed the way we're discussing it, because, you know, free-to-play games are here to stay for the foreseeable future, and Blizzard is trying to get in on that market. I can't blame them for that as a business. I can blame them for their implementation, and I can absolutely publish a podcast episode talking about the fact that the way they've handled framing any of these things has been anything but good.
Yeah.
The only caveat there being that we kind of walked into, well, and I mean we as the collective we, as a culture, kind of walked into it distrusting Activision Blizzard.
Mm-hmm.
They have not made very many good decisions recently, so it's fascinating to see how free to play games, if we're just gonna like narrow it down to that one thing, have been perceived differently by different publishers. And I think some of it has been, you know, the allegations of, you know, workplace misconduct and everything that kind of turn people off. I think some of that can be attributed to like Ubisoft as well, where Ubisoft gets a lot of bad press because they've managed to generate a lot of it for themselves. Whether or not they're trying to change, they're still kind of in the black book of video game developers because workplace allegations, lower than intended performing games, something like Skull and Bones, which by all rights should be free to play, considering the model it's going after, you know, being delayed 75,000 times and then disappearing. You know, there's a lot of things where like we kind of have this inherent bias towards those companies anyway. But the framing has so much to do with it. And the framing has to include an outer frame, which is to say, what is the discourse about this company beforehand?
Yeah. No, exactly. Trust definitely matters.
Yeah, and if you're going to move to a free-to-play, that's already a huge leap. For a property like Overwatch, which was reviewed glowingly and played ravenously by people for years right after the first one launched, you need to find a good way to frame a move to free to play.
I think,
and they didn't.
Yeah. Well, it's also, have you heard of, I'm trying to remember what, I think it's anchoring. I think anchoring is the term that people use in psychology, but you know, like anchoring, right?
Yeah, I'm familiar with the idea.
So you know, just to summarize for other people, it's, you know, typically used in like sales. So you say a price, You say something's going to cost like $100, and then you reduce it to its actual price that you want people to pay. So you're like, oh, speculating about the cost. And you're like, oh, I think it'll cost $100. But when it actually comes out, you say it's like $80 or something. Well, you think that's a deal as the consumer because you're like, well, this was originally worth $100, but now it's worth $80. And so anyway, that's framing. Like, that's a way of doing framing. But my point with all of this is, or manipulating framing, I guess really is what it is. My point with it, though, is I think it's really important what comes first in any of these game projects. Was your game started as a premium experience? If it was, you may have issues moving to free-to-play because people are always going to remember what they had in that premium experience, and they're always going to compare it to that. If you're a free-to-play game...
paid for it.
Yeah, and they may have paid for it. And so I think it's a different conversation if you were to go from free to play to premium. Like, I think whatever comes first, that framing is just going to be either harder or easier. And I don't think that anything candidly that Blizzard has made is going to easily transition into a free to play experience.
Yeah,
at least not as a mainline game. Like as a spinoff, sure, maybe, but like a mainline game,
Yeah, which is why, again, framing. So I guess the next logical question would be, why do we move games from premium experiences like Overwatch to free-to-play experiences like Overwatch 2? And the answer, Zach, I will give you one moment to formulate, and then I will let you know, because the answer is pretty obvious.
It's because Call of Duty with Warzone and Halo with Halo Infinite can make oodles and oodles of money if they go free-to-play on cosmetics and in-game purchases.
Yes. Huh? I pulled up a couple of figures, and now we'll run through these quickly just to drop a couple of quick ones. Fortnite, as of 2021, generated about $5.4 billion in 2018, for sure.
Jesus.
Guaranteed. $5.4 billion. And then Call of Duty, one estimate I found said that it makes about $6,300 a minute. And Apex Legends has made over $2 billion total as of May 2022. So there is a lot of money in there. But to tie it into framing, it's really hard to sell people on the idea that you are going to make more money by charging them nothing, because there are so many inherent mechanical differences that pop up. Because, again, like we said, a game needs to make money. It has to make money. Otherwise, there will not be a sequel. There will not be anything. So, one of those big reasons is obviously it's a sustained source of income.
Yeah.
Whether or not you're using loot boxes. Yeah, it's consistent as opposed to like a huge bump. And we can even relate this to like podcast download numbers. When you publish, there's a bump and then it drops. And then, if people liked your stuff, you can go back and get the other one. But we record and publish every other week. So that's very different than something like this. But, if you're charging $60, $70 for a game, you're going to get this huge, crazy jump right at the beginning, and then it's going to kind of trail off. Whereas if you can make something like an Overwatch 2 that could provide a consistent, never-ending, potentially, source of revenue, why would you not make that difference? Why would you not make that change as a developer, as a publisher? As a developer, I could say because it stifles creativity and you're locked into mechanics you've already created without being able to iterate on any others. As a publisher, I would say it would make a fuck ton of money.
Well, I mean, to look at it from the why is it good for studios side, because I think, yes, that is definitely like the negative perspective you can have. But like having that consistent and having that consistent revenue adds stability to your studio. It means that you can keep talent longer. You don't need the whole boom bust cycle of releasing games, which typically is, you spend 2, 3, 4 years working on a game, and then you fire a bunch of people when the game's done because you can't afford to have them on anymore during the downtime. Like, having these free-to-play games, these live service games, actually have a lot of benefits to studios and the people that work there, assuming everyone's getting paid appropriately, because they add stability, they add a consistent amount of revenue. And I think historically that's just not been something that a lot of game studios have, because they're relying so heavily on their next title to succeed. If you're Epic, you don't need your next title to necessarily blow it out of the water when Fortnite is making just ridiculous money, because Fortnite's going to pad any failure you have. So it makes a ton of sense for companies to want to do these free-to-play live service games. And I think,
$5.8 billion.
Yeah, $5.8 billion, which is
2021.
Absolutely astronomically ridiculous.
I'm sorry, 5.4.
Oh, 5.4.
I've done that twice now.
Yeah. Well, still,
it's just a paltry $0.4 billion.
I wish I could have the paltry 0.4 billion.
As do I. Sorry, I cut you off.
Oh no, I was just gonna say, I think this kind of ties into the last thing that I think we've got written down to discuss, but also a point that you brought up during our planning discussion that I think is particularly interesting, which doesn't have anything necessarily to do inherently with the Overwatch topic, but does have to do with free to play, which is the move for a lot of games to actually have their multiplayer be free to play, but their campaign and single player be a premium experience, which is a very interesting move. And I think I like it more because it lets more people play the game. You can play your multiplayer game with your buds, but then it keeps the premium grossness out of the single player experience, which is where I typically think it does more damage in
I would
actually
agree with
ruining
that 100%.
it. Yeah.
Yeah. Again, at some point, Zach is going to fall ill. This is not a murder plan. At some point, Zach will fall ill, and I will have to record an entire episode by myself, and it will probably be about Assassin's Creed Unity, one of the most grossing out games I've ever played in terms of paying $60 for something only to have a bunch of shit gated for me. And it's a single fucking player game. So a single player game where you have to pay a bunch of money in order to unlock additional stuff, it's easy to ignore, but it's also just disgusting. Whereas, one of these games that launches for free technically, but you can pay more money into it in order to progress quicker or whatnot. You kind of know what you're signing up for if you're informed about this sort of thing. But yes, I completely agree with you. Those sort of mechanics in single player games. I mean, the Battlefront 2 example is another huge one with the loot boxes, but the sentiment you just brought up is something that I completely agree with.
Yeah, I think it's more. Sorry, that was a really bad sentence. What I actually meant to say.
Was it actually a sentence?
It wasn't really a sentence. I don't think there was any purpose behind it. But it's when you play these multiplayer games like Warzone or Halo Infinite, I think the other nice thing is they kind of function similar to the gameplay demos we used to have as, kids that you would download. They give you, obviously the multiplayer isn't the game, but it gives you kind of the ability to try out the game and see whether or not you would like to play it. And I think that's something that's really cool about demos that we just don't have anymore, is there's not really any trying a game before you buy it. So they're nice from that perspective. But also I think it's just really I would have never touched a COD game during the pandemic, except Warzone was free. And I played a lot of Warzone for a little bit with my friends. And it was great. I loved it. Absolutely loved it. So I really enjoy the move to putting a lot of these multiplayer games as free to play, if I'm being honest, because it's just more stuff to do with friends. It's just more options. And there's monetization and it's, your typical stuff that's not great. But I gotta be honest, for me personally, it really doesn't bug me that much. even though some of it admittedly is a little psychologically manipulative for some people, I think, for sure.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. I would say, like, again, like, there was this whole period that I've actually written about. I'm not sure if it was ever published, but I definitely wrote about it, talking about, like, this whole period of time where you'd pay for a game, and because multiplayer was blowing up, there would be a multiplayer game, and the single player campaign suffered for it. And I would never touch the multiplayer component ever. And I'm like, well, why did you need to make that so bad for me, the single player? Because you had fewer resources to make a good single player game, because you needed to bifurcate the team to make a multiplayer mode. And I was like, it's not really my cup of tea. So yeah, no, I'm actually with you. I think, like, the idea of selling your game and then making multiplayer, and I think COD is probably exempt from this, because I'm pretty sure that most of the games that launch have their own multiplayer mode. But as previously explained, Warzone is absolutely raking in money. It's not failing in any sense, and it is completely free to play. So yeah, no, I like the idea of, a Halo Infinite saying, like, everyone likes Halo multiplayer. Let's make it available to everyone. They can make stuff for us, and we can sell them cosmetics and all this stuff, and then we'll sell the campaign for actual money. And yeah, it's interesting. It's just so different than it would have been 10, 15 years ago. It's insane to think about how different that is. But I think that move is probably fine. So that's an interesting kind of angle to the free-to-play discussion, which is, like, which elements of our game can we make more money on by giving it away for free?
Yeah, it's really like, I'm trying to think how to express it as kind of my last point. And I've hit on this point a lot. We've talked about microtransactions in some way, and this discussion, of course, is going to hit on it because we're talking about free to play, which has a lot of that stuff. But it's like, I just really don't necessarily intrinsically hate paying for stuff. Actually, a lot of the time in free to play games, I justify spending up to at least $60, $40 to $60, because I got the game for free. And I know that's psychological to some degree. Like, I don't need to do that. But, like, I'm like, oh, I like this game, I'll support it for X dollars. But, like, as long as the free to play stuff doesn't get in the way of the central gameplay loop and take me out of the experience, I generally don't have issue. I definitely still wish that there was more of the ability to unlock things organically in even just free to play games. But I definitely, as we've talked about, I understand the need for monetization and why a lot of that gets gated. I will say, I still think from, like, a purely game design perspective, too much of it can feel really bad if you don't have any form of organic, unlocking of content. Like, it doesn't feel great. I don't want the thing to literally just tell me to pay money to this, void every 5 seconds.
Yeah, no, I'm completely with you. I mean, using that as just, like, as my final closing point, I would say moving from premium to free to play, or launching as free to play, they can be two very different things, right? So if you've got a game that is designed to just be a game, you pay for the experience and you get the experience. And then if you want to layer on a battle pass, like, I think Destiny did something similar to that, or Destiny 2 rather, did something similar to that towards the end, or before they did stuff like, the expansion packs and updates and everything. Like, that's fine, but the game should be designed to be playable by people who aren't going to just, like, throw thousands of dollars at you. And in that sense, like, a free-to-play game, like, one of the other ones, Warframe, I think, is a very successful free-to-play game that feels borderline AAA to me. But once you get a little bit deeper into it, you do kind of need to either grind a lot or, pay up front for some extra stuff. And, I think free to play has its benefits. Free to play has its downfalls, but I think the ultimate question in this situation is, are you only moving to free to play, or launching as free to play, for the financial benefit? If so, make sure your marketing team is a little bit better than the one at Blizzard's. And if you're moving from free to play from premium as well, within a single title, then the framing is extremely important. And I don't know. I don't have a problem spending money on a game. I mean, I guess maybe I'm the personality type that doesn't like to spend extra money on something I already got for free. I would rather just grind it, because I'm notoriously stingy with my money. But the overall experience itself, the design principles, how are you designing the game? I think you have to start with a game that has been designed to maximize player satisfaction and fulfillment. And if you are cutting features or jimmying with mechanics to make you really want to buy that stuff, then maybe we have to redefine free-to-play games as basically a recontextualized demo. Because if you can spend 5 hours playing the game without that much issue, whatever. If it goes much past that and then it starts gating you really, really, really hard, then the design of the game is flawed from the beginning, because it wasn't designed for anyone in particular. It was designed to funnel a collective into purchasing something that they were supposed to be able to get for free. If you can't have the full experience without paying for it, I don't think it's a worthwhile move, except for the business.
Yeah. No, it's definitely, some people are going to be turned off by certain things, not turned off by others. I think free to play, for sure, has an important spot in the modern game industry. Outside of it, I don't think it is necessarily a completely bad invention that it exists, because I think there's a lot of really good, memorable moments you can have with friends in some wonderful games that are free to play. But yeah, it's such a hard topic to really cover the positives and negatives, how to set it up. Yeah, and that also wasn't even necessarily the topic we set out for today. But it's a lot.
Yeah, it is. It is indeed a lot. And again, sorry for rambling, but I think we've probably reached the end of our allotted time.
Yeah, they're going to kick us out of the studio soon.
All right. Yeah, no, we're definitely in the same studio, and our time is running. I'm getting the little flashing red light. So
Jim is mad at us. He's telling us we got to get out of the room. So
beans, not them. No. So actually, you know what? This time I'm gonna go ahead and first start off by thanking Beach Girl for providing our exceptional intro and outro music. You can find Beach Girl and all of their music on Spotify, SoundCloud, Bandcamp, or just about anywhere else you'd find fine digital music. Again, that is Beach Girl, and if you like the sound of our intro, you will like everything they do. Probably, or maybe you won't. But either way, you should. So that's my moral judgment on you.
And I would like to do a quick shout out to Dougie Art, our amazing friend that worked on our podcast logo. If you are ever in the market for podcast logos or just general graphic design, feel free to check them out. They do have an Etsy as well as an Instagram under the same name. That is Dougie Art. We appreciate you, and thanks so much.
Yes, we love you very much. And also, even if you do not care for our podcast art, please actually do check out Dougie Art. They do also just really cute stuff. It's also very adorable. You will find something you like on there. I promise you that.
This is true. This is very true. And I will say thank you, everyone, for attending our show, or whatever the right way to put it is. We appreciate you coming out, and I hope... Yeah, I whatever. It's a live recording, I guess. I don't know. I mean, technically it is live in the moment, but by being anyway, this
as
doesn't
are
matter.
most things.
Yes, as are most things. Live in the moment, everyone. Have a good rest of your day. This is Zach signing off.
Oh God, Zach did one. Now I have to go down again. Goodbye. I get it.